Back in 2015, the company I worked for expanded to a new office in Rochester, Minnesota. I stayed there for about a week to overview their recruitment process and to sign off on a couple of larger purchases. It was all standard procedure. I'd done this before at an affiliate branch, but it was my first time doing it on my own. It was a lot of responsibility. I got a room at a small hotel called the Silver Sands Hotel. I think the place closed in 2021. I can't see it online anymore. It was just down the road from Silver Lake, hence the name. It didn't have a lot of visitors, so the rooms were cheap and surprisingly fresh. While my work is interesting in and of itself, what I'm here to tell you about is something that happened at that hotel. I'm a practical kind of man, so I'm not much for ghost stories and make-believe. But there's also no way for me to ignore something experienced with my own eyes and ears. After my first day at the new office, I was exhausted. All I'd had to eat all day was a salami and brie cheese sub from a cheap deli, and my stomach was doing backflips. I was having a smoke outside the hotel before settling in for the night, talking to my wife on the phone. I always do this thing when I'm having a long phone conversation where I pace back and forth. I was barely paying attention when I wandered across a small field of tall grass by the back road. In that field, I spotted something blue. I got a closer look and found a handful of blue sunflowers. I thought they were just dry and dead at first, but it was just the color. I picked one to take home to my wife. Blue is her favorite color. I think she could hear something sneaky in my voice. I remember her commenting on it. I went back to my room. There was a Bible in the nightstand, so I opened it to a random passage and put the sunflower in it. Then I put a lamp on top of it for pressure. A simple press and draw. I didn't think much of it until the next morning. When I woke up, there were a couple of little black bugs crawling across the nightstand. Just a few, maybe 3 or 4. I crushed them with my thumb, washed my hands, and figured that was that. Then I went to the office. After a long day at work, that little detail completely slipped my mind. I figured they were just something brought in with the flower, and that they'd be either dead or gone before long. My mind was full of Excel spreadsheets, email responses, and company policy. I didn't have time to think of little things crawling around my hotel room. But by the time I got back, I couldn't ignore them anymore. I didn't notice them at first, but the moment I sat down on my bed and turned on the lamp, they were impossible to ignore. They'd spread from just a couple to a couple dozen, and they weren't just crawling around my nightstand, but in my bed. They were crawling all over the Bible and the dry-pressed sunflower, so I just threw the thing away. I tried wiping away the bugs, but there were too many, and a couple of them got on my clothes. They didn't bite or anything, but I could feel them tickling me. It was so faint that even after I'd wiped them all off, I could still imagine myself feeling them. It was late, but I was disgusted. I went downstairs and talked to the receptionist about my room having some kind of bedbugs, and they took it pretty seriously. They gave me a new room immediately and told me they'd investigate it. But despite a shower, a change of clothes, and a completely new room, I could still feel those things tickling my skin. I imagined seeing them, only for it to turn out to be specks of dust or grains of sand. They were gone, but they didn't feel gone. The next day, as I left for work, the receptionist called me over. I was a bit stressed, and I think she picked up on that, so she cut straight to the point. "Sir, we haven't found any bedbugs in your old room," she explained. "You should be okay. I'm sorry if you were inconvenienced." "You sure there are no bedbugs?" I asked. "Did you check the nightstand?" "Yeah, we checked all over. We take this sort of thing seriously." "Well, I'm sure of what I saw," I said. "There were bugs there." "I don't know what to tell you, sir. There's nothing there." I was already late for work. so I didn't have time to get a new room. I stopped briefly at the reception. I explained that I found a couple more bugs and that I'd appreciate it if they checked it out. And if they found something, they moved my items to another room. The receptionist rolled her eyes but kept a smile on her face. She clearly thought I was having some kind of hypochondriac moment or that I was messing with her, but she was a stalwart professional. She smiled, agreed, and wished me a good day. I've got to emphasize, I don't have a problem with creepy crawlouts. I ate earthworms as a dare when I was a kid. I would catch bumblebees with my bare hands. I never really cared about that stuff, but something about these things really bothered me. It's as if they weren't just intrusive. They made me doubt they were real. That day went by in a bit of a blur. I have vague memories of almost falling asleep in a meeting and having a long discussion about something that I forgot the topic of halfway through. I kept getting these random tics where it felt like a nerve had been pinched. I tried to remind myself that it was most likely my imagination, but then again, I couldn't tell for sure. By the time I got back to the hotel, I ran up to the reception. The receptionist that I'd previously talked to had finished her shift, but the man who'd taken her place had clearly been told about me. He was ready. I didn't even ask him before I got an answer. "Sir, there are no bedbugs in your room," he said. "You're completely fine. And yes, we've checked and double-checked." "I'm sorry," I sighed. "Stress, you know. I'm sure I saw something, but—" "Sir, I understand. It's fine. If there really were bedbugs, that'd be something we take very seriously. I don't know what they are, but I saw a bunch of them crawling across the floor. Really small things, like ground pepper." He raised an eyebrow and gave me a courteous nod. Discussion over. That night, I was exhausted. I just lay in bed, letting whatever crawl around do it. I didn't care. I could feel them in my hair and on my skin, but they couldn't be real. They'd already checked, and there were no insects in there. And yet, I found myself looking at a dozen or so of them, crawling around on the floor. As I dozed in and out of an uneasy sleep, I heard a strange scratching noise, like someone dragging a brush across a carpet. Looking over the edge of the bed, the insects on the floor were gone. Or had they never been there to begin with? I kept hearing this strange noise all through the night. I finally fell asleep with my arm hanging over the side of the bed. I could feel a couple of bugs gathering on my fingers. Then there was something cold, like a wet dog nose. Something touched my finger. I peeked down from my bed a final time as the first rays of the morning sun poked through the hotel curtains, and something pulled back fast, retreating under the bed. I pulled my arm up and rolled over, hoping it was just my imagination. I couldn't fathom the idea of something hiding under my bed. In the morning, I couldn't tell if it'd been a dream or not. The bugs on the floor were gone. I looked under the bed, and all I could find was a small vent, just big enough for someone to fit their head in. But it was my final day, and I was checking out. I checked my bag and my clothes a final time, and it looked fine. Nothing creepy nor crawly. I checked out of my room and handed the receptionist my key. "No issues tonight?" she asked. "Some," I said. "Not more than usual." "I'm sorry," she huffed, "but I don't understand. Did you really see something up there?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "It's like these little black things. I can't explain it. We had Jordan up there all day, and he couldn't find a single bug. He vacuumed the place too, maybe 3 times. I don't know what to tell you," I said. "It's frustrating. Sir, I don't want to come off as accusatory, but may I offer some advice?" "Shoot." She gave me a long look. My eyes felt heavier and heavier the more I kept eye contact. I was more tired than I first thought, it seemed. "Maybe it's not the room, sir," she said. "Maybe it's you or something you brought in." I made it through the day without all that much trouble. We had a couple of meetings, rounded off a few difficult conversations, and double-checked the issues we tackled over the week. Despite it all, I was done, and I could go back home. Work over. It was already getting dark when I got to my car. If I left immediately, I'd be home by midnight. I could probably have stayed another night, but at that point, I just wanted to go home. I needed something familiar to reset. Usually when I feel like I got a screw loose, my wife is the one who keeps me grounded. I really missed her. It was all such a relief. I was associating that hotel with that itchy feeling of having something crawling on my skin, and getting as far away from it as possible really helped. It wouldn't matter if it was real or not if I was far, far away. So I drove off, adding some distance between me and the town of Rochester. But another 30 minutes or so down the road, I felt it. That itch, that tickles. I stopped at a rest stop up ahead, turned off my car, and closed my eyes. I took a few deep breaths. I tried to convince myself I wasn't really feeling it. It couldn't be there. It wasn't. It was really dark outside. I could hear cars and trucks passing by from the nearby road. There was no one else around. Or at least so I thought. Looking back at it, there'd been signs. The scratching noises at night. The air vent under my bed. And why was I the only one to see those bugs? It's as if they appeared and disappeared, seemingly at random. I opened my eyes, hoping something had changed, and though I didn't know it, it had. I just hadn't seen it. I turned my car keys, but nothing happened. I tried again. Not a sound. Nothing. I got out to check the engine, but I couldn't make sense of it. I'm not much of a car guy, but I could tell a couple of cables had either been cut or pulled out. It wasn't a clean cut, though. It looked like they'd been gnawed on. Getting back in my car, I pulled out my phone to call for assistance when I noticed something. Little black spots on my hand. They were really there. I could feel them. Then, a click. My glove box slowly opened by itself. Something pure white and glistening wet emerged, like an elongated slug. I couldn't move. It's as if I couldn't fully comprehend it. There was barely any light, just vague reflections coming from passing cars in a rhythmic pulse-like manner, like a slow strobe light. And with every new pulse of light, that thing was a little closer. I couldn't tell if it was trying to sneak up on me or if it was just naturally slow. It touched my arm. It was a familiar sensation. This is what I'd felt that night when I let my arm hang off the side of the bed. It twitched a little and gave my arm a big lick. The thing burned like acid, and it suddenly hit me that this was, in fact, real. My heart shot out of my chest as I stumbled my way out of the car, falling backwards out of the driver's seat. I kicked the door closed just as a white, writhing mess threw itself at the window. It looked gelatinous. It pressed itself against the corner of the window and slowly forced its way through. Only then did I realize I'd left my phone in the car. I must have dropped it the moment that thing touched me. I crawled backwards to get some distance, but by the time I'd gotten up to run, that thing had made its way out of the car. It was surprisingly big, tall enough to reach my midriff if it stretched. I can't properly explain what this thing looked like. It was more octopus than slug, but it had the texture of a soft kitten. It had a body-like mass, which resembled a cluster of locust pods. A few pods produced these long appendages, which seemed to stretch several times its height. It's so hard to say what was up or down near the head. I couldn't see any eyes or ears, but it seemed to know exactly where I was. So when I turned to run, it was right behind me. It was faster than I'd anticipated. It threw out its arms and pulled itself forward, quickly gaining momentum until it could wrap itself around my leg. It did so with the force of a fox trap. I made it to the tree line before it got me. There was a nearby picnic table, and I managed to grab the foot of it. I tried to pull myself forward, but that thing, it was heavy. It was like trying to drag a plastic bag full of marmalade. I fought it tooth and goddamn nail. I punched, kicked, slapped, and pulled at it, but it just kept climbing. Those appendages wrapped around my arms, burning me like acetone. It got to my neck, and I could hear a sound coming from it, like an inflating and deflating balloon combined with the purr of a cat. Then it retracted a membrane, revealing a stinger. It struck me in the shoulder. I was full on panicking at this point, screaming for help at the top of my lungs. But I just couldn't make a lot of noise. This thing was heavy, and I was barely breathing. I was taking breaths that were so shallow that I could feel my vision getting blurry. It wrapped something around my arm and pressed. It pressed so hard I thought something would snap. The more I pulled, the harder it grabbed, locking me to the ground. But it wasn't killing me. It wasn't drinking my blood. I looked closer. There were little black bugs pouring out of the sting in my shoulder. This blob thing was licking them up. These things had literally been inside me, and it was eating them. It explained so much. The bugs had been using me as a sort of carrier, and the moment I left the room, they disappeared. That's why I was the only one seeing them. They followed me. And this thing had been following me in turn, trying to catch a stray meal. This was like an anteater, and I was an anthill. I tried to stay still. It dragged its appendages across my hair, effectively cleaning me like a worried mother cat. I got 3 more stings, one in my shoulder blade, one in my left triceps, and one in my right calf. And with every wound, it pressed those things out of me. Then it was done. It rolled off me and dragged itself into the woods. After a minute or so, I couldn't hear it anymore. I got up, and my whole body felt numb. That thing must have had some kind of anesthetic effect, because I couldn't feel my skin around the puncture wounds. I had these dark blue fist-sized bruises over my body where that thing had squeezed me, but at that moment, I was just happy to be alive. Getting back to my car, I realized something. That thing must have been more intelligent than I gave it credit for. It had understood that stopping my car would give it the time and space it needed to attack. It also knew how to stop my car. It had taken several careful steps not to be caught or seen before it revealed itself. And that first contact, it had slowly reached out to me, as if to see if I was hostile. I picked up my phone and called for a tow. After all that, it seemed I was staying in Minnesota for another night. Now that I look back on it, years later, I still don't know what to make of it. I think I got in touch with something I shouldn't, and this thing was cleaning up the mess. Something hid inside that damned flower, and this blob was feeding on it. I've never heard or seen anything like it before or since, but I can't deny that it happened. It was tough to explain to my wife. I finally went with, "I messed with a wasp nest." It was easier than trying to explain what I'd experienced over those days. I sounded insane just talking it out in my own head. I believe there are ecosystems that live right under our noses. I think there's more to it than we can anticipate, and some of these things come from places we can only begin to understand. If these kinds of things can exist up here, on the surface, with us, what else is out there in the places where we can't look? It makes me think of all those dark and unchecked corners of the room. The world, really. If you lift the wrong rock at the wrong time, what might spring out? When I was a kid, my parents used to tell me stories about the Bonhomme Securas, or the 7 o'clock man in English, which basically is a sinister old figure who snatched children who didn't come home before dark. I always thought it was just one of those scare tactics adults used to make kids behave, something to roll your eyes at. And I did, until last month. Let me back up a bit. I, 27N, worked as a counselor at a kids' winter camp, and tradition wanted that at the end of each day, 2 or 3 counselors would tell the kids scary stories around a campfire while eating marshmallows. A classic summer camp stereotype, you might say, but incredibly effective at delighting the kids, and the Bonhomme Securas was always one of the favorites. So I'd tell the tale of a hunched old man, dressed in tattered black clothes, who prowled the streets and fields at dusk. According to legend, he carried a large burlap sack slung over his shoulder, big enough to fit a child. According to the legend, he'd walk the streets whistling, a sharp, high-pitched sound to lure curious kids into the dark. Once they came too close, he'd snatch them, stuff them into his sack, and take them away. Where? No one knew. Some said to a hidden lair, others said to the woods. The stories varied, but the ending was always the same. The children were never seen again. The kids loved it. They shrieked and laughed nervously, clinging to each other as the firelight danced on their faces. But for me, it was just that, a story. I'd never believed a word of it. That changed on a bitterly cold night last December. It was a weeknight, and I'd been out running errands in a small Quebec town where the camp was located. Snow was falling steadily, muffling the world in a thick, eerie silence. The streets were nearly deserted, save for the occasional car crawling cautiously over the icy roads. My bags of groceries hung heavy in my hands as I trudged along the sidewalk, eager to get back to the warmth of my apartment. Then I heard a child scream, high-pitched and panicked, echoing down the street. I froze. It was the kind of sound that twists your stomach into knots. Looking around, I saw no one. The streetlights cast long, yellowish beams onto the snow, but the surrounding alleyways and doorways were shadows, dark and impenetrable. The scream came again, this time closer. Instinct took over, and I dropped my bags, calling out, "Hello? Anyone needs help?" No answer. The snow crunched behind me. I spun around, heart-hammering, but saw nothing but my own footprints. The street was empty. Then I heard a whistle, high and sharp, slicing through the silence like a knife. My breath caught in my throat. It was just as I described it to the kids so many times. A chill ran down my spine, and not from the cold. I told myself it was just someone playing a prank, maybe a kid messing around. But then the whistle came again, closer this time, and I realized something else. It was coming from the direction I just walked. There were no footprints in the snow behind me. And then I saw him. A figure emerged from the shadows of an alleyway, stepping into the pale glow of a street lamp. He was tall and thin, impossibly so, his body wrapped in layers of ragged black cloth that hung off him like a shroud. His face was obscured by the brim of a battered hat, but I could see enough to know something was wrong. His skin was grayish, stretched taut over his sharp cheekbones, and his mouth twisted into a grotesque grin that revealed teeth far too long and jagged to be human. Slung over his shoulder was a burlap sack. It squirmed. I was frozen, unable to look away as he reached into the sack and pulled out a small, pale human hand. My stomach turned as I realized it belonged to a child. The figure held the limp arm as if inspecting it, then glanced up at me. Though his eyes were hidden, I felt his gaze lock onto mine, heavy and oppressive. "You're out late," he rasped, his voice like the creak of a door hinge. He dropped the hand back into the sack, which gave another faint wriggle. "You shouldn't be out so late." I stumbled back, nearly slipping on the icy sidewalk, and bolted. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, the sound of crunching snow, and that damn whistle chasing me all the way home. I didn't look back. I couldn't. When I finally slammed the door behind me, I locked every bolt and turned off all the lights. For hours, I sat in the dark, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination. But when I finally worked up the nerve to look outside, the snow in front of my building was undisturbed. No footprints. Nothing to suggest anyone had been there, except for the faint imprint of a sack dragged through the snow. I haven't told this story to the kids at camp since that night. I've tried to forget it ever happened. A few weeks ago, I started working as a night shift security guard for an old office building downtown. The place is mostly empty at night, just a few cleaning staff and the occasional late-working executive. The job seemed easy. Check the cameras, do an hourly patrol of the building, and make sure everything stays locked up. At first, the hardest part was staying awake. I'd sip coffee at my desk and glance at the cameras, which usually showed nothing but empty hallways. The building was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you notice every little sound. It was on my third night when I saw something strange. Around 3 a.m., the motion sensor in the west stairwell went off. The camera feed showed nothing, just an empty staircase. I figured it was a glitch. Sensors in older buildings can be finicky. But when I went to check it out, I found the stairwell door open. I was sure I'd locked it earlier during my rounds. I shrugged it off and locked the door again. Maybe one of the cleaning staff had used it and forgotten to close it. But when I asked the cleaners about it, they swore they hadn't gone near that stairwell. The following night, it happened again. Same time, same stairwell. This time, I didn't bother checking it out. I just locked the door remotely and made a note in my report. On my 5th night, things got weirder. I was reviewing the camera footage from earlier in the evening when I noticed something odd. At 2:47 a.m., the west stairwell camera showed the door slowly creaking open. No one was there. The hallway was empty. But as the door swung wide, the lights in the stairwell flickered, just once. I rewound the footage and watched it again, and that's when I noticed it. Just before the lights flickered, a shadow passed across the bottom of the stairs. It was quick, like someone had darted just out of view of the camera. That was the first time I felt uneasy. The next night, I decided to do my rounds early, hoping to get ahead of whatever was going on. I started with the west stairwell, checking every door and corner. Everything was locked, exactly as it should be. But when I got to the bottom of the stairs, I noticed something on the wall. Scratches. Long, deep marks running down the paint, as if someone had dragged their fingernails across it. I reported the scratches to my supervisor the next morning, but he just laughed. "It's an old building," he said. "These things happen." Last night was my breaking point. Around 3:15 a.m., I heard a noise, not through the cameras, but with my own ears. A low, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on a door. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, coming from the direction of the west stairwell. I hesitated, my heart racing, then grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the noise. When I reached the stairwell, the tapping stopped. The door was open again, swinging gently on its hinges. The air in the stairwell was freezing, much colder than the rest of the building. I stepped inside, shining my flashlight down the stairs. That's when I heard it, a whisper, faint, almost inaudible, coming from the bottom of the stairs. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading, desperate. I froze, listening, and then the whisper stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I turned and left the stairwell, locking the door behind me. I didn't finish my rounds that night. Instead, I sat at the security desk, staring at the monitors, waiting for my shift to end. I called out sick today. I'm not sure if I'm going back.